What I've tried to do is to develop the simplest, easiest way for people to balance their nervous system, stimulate the vagus nerve, and then switch from the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, which is what results in the burnout, to the parasympathetic nervous system. But it's also important that we come up with a way of enabling the person to do it on a regular basis, because it takes a period of time to rewire the nervous system. And so I just wondered what you were thinking, and then maybe we could put our heads together and come up with an approach.
So you were thinking of just nurses and healthcare workers, or could this apply to anybody experiencing anxiety or depression?
It would work for anybody, and I know teachers have been having the extreme anxiety and depression, as well as healthcare workers. But naturally, I like the idea of starting with nurses and or doctors if they would be interested as well, because I think that then we are starting out with medical verification as opposed to a general self-help program that's well known, like mindfulness, which doesn't necessarily work on anxiety and can make the anxiety worse. So what I noticed myself, and I've also worked with Parkinson's Resources of Oregon and have experience with people with neurodegenerative conditions. And the key is consistent practice to balance the psyche, and then to shift that internal dialogue, which has gone totally negative, where someone gets to the point of suicidal ideation, back to the normal resiliency that they had before they were overworked. And naturally, the more you can practice, the better. But I thought that we could start with maybe 15 minutes to 30 minutes, and then ideally the person might be able to do a little bit more. But I wanted to get your feedback on it, what you've experienced, and your ideas for making this work, because this approach has not been used before on a mass level. And I think that it's extremely powerful, and that automatically the person will feel better, but they have to stick with it for a period of time. And then the calm and the objectivity should come back. But I'm interested in shaping it in any way that you think would work better for the healthcare workers. And then we essentially have a test that can be used for other people as well, but it's medical professionals who are under the most pressure right now. So it seems to me that that's a very good place to start.
I get what you're saying about having some medical credibility to it by using the medical professionals. But the only thing that really ends up giving anything credibility is research and data. That's the piece that people buy into, otherwise they consider it anecdotal.
Yes, of course, I understand.
I think that there is some value in looking at these patients with long COVID who are actually asking for help. I've seen a lot of positive response to the videos of yours that I posted already. I think that we might want to target the group that can't get into mental health care, the group that is sitting at home focusing on this. And also, just a point for your information, COVID is actually impacting the central nervous system. And within that piece of it, we're seeing a lot of people developing not only trauma, of course, but they're developing anxiety and depression when they have absolutely zero history. And it looks like the serotonin uptake system is impacted and impaired. So some of the pieces of that, with serotonin being what I call the happy hormone,
right?
You're not absorbing enough of that because those nerves or those neurons in your brain are not absorbing. They're not capturing the serotonin across the synapses, across the synapses, then there's necessarily going to be negativity and depression. So I think that there's a multi-pronged approach that has to be taken. We have to address the psychological and the medical together. You know what I mean?
Yes, and as a part of the way I like to do our program is to combine supplements that work on both serotonin and dopamine, with
Mhm.
serotonin, as you just said, being happiness and dopamine being pleasure. And she switched off the screen just now.
It's
Oh, now
back.
she's back. Now she's back. Okay, great. Great. So I think that there's a number of nutrients that would increase about neurotransmitter balance in the brain, which has gone out of balance because of the inflamed system. And so I would like them to be combining, say, 5-HTP or tryptophan before bed and or during the day for serotonin. And then I would like them to be using phenylalanine or tyrosine, and they can be combined with mucuna and rhodiola extracts. And those are all known naturopathic approaches to balancing out the psyche and the neurotransmitters, as long as it doesn't combine with something they're already taking in the antidepressant or SSRI category. But the nutrients, so something like acetyl L-carnitine, it's in every memory section in a health food store or even a grocery store where we are in Oregon. And so what I feel is that if they were to combine the breathing exercises, which include standing postures, walking postures, seated, and lying down. If they don't have enough strength to stand up, they can sit and they can lie down and they can do the exercises which regulate the nervous system. And what we're trying to do is increase the efficiency of the gas exchange through the respiratory system, which is oxygen in, carbon dioxide out, and that increases circulation throughout the body, right? And I'm avoiding Chinese medical terminology because most doctors don't like it unless they have a familiarity with it. And I think we can explain everything in terms of neurotransmitter balance, and then the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. But I think that diet is very important, and lowering sugar and alcohol is very important. A lot of people apparently began drinking much more heavily. And so I think that we want to take a multifaceted approach where we want to use brain nutrition and then these breathing exercises, which also have an aerobic and an anaerobic strength building component. And I think that if someone practices Qigong or these types of exercises, which are also part of Tai Chi and part of pranayama in terms of yoga, that the overall vitality of the system will be stimulated and the basic healing mechanism of the body will kick in after a period of time, and then there should be improvement. And so I wondered what you would think about how to approach it, because people are at different levels of fitness. So that if someone is too weak to take a walk, then they should be practicing with very little motion in terms of the lower body. But at the same time, if they have the ability to go outside to a park, then there's other exercises that can be done around a tree with specific types of walking. And the idea is any practice in a green leafy environment, the oxygen content in the air is so much higher that it's more beneficial than inside. But inside will work very well also if they're in a small apartment in a city. And it's just a question of the regular practice and then the motivation of the individual to practice.
So Barclay, let me ask you, what are your credentials? So I know you've learned from a lot of Chinese medicine doctors, and you sound like you speak with some experience and authority on psychological matters, but what are your degrees and such in your training?
Well, I have a BA in East Asian Studies from Columbia University in New York. And then I've been researching and studying Chinese medicine and internal martial arts and Qigong since the 80s. And so I've studied from 6 different Chinese doctors who also taught Qigong and internal martial arts. And then in Eugene, what I did is develop a program with Parkinson's Resources of Oregon. And then I worked with many older adults in classes and then going to their house who were having balance issues and other problems that go along with neurodegenerative conditions. And so I feel highly qualified because I've studied in Asia and the United States and Europe to take exactly basically what I created with Parkinson's Resources of Oregon, and then it fits perfectly with someone who's had respiratory problems because the whole way that it works is improving the breathing process so that you're breathing with the entire expanse of the lungs from the lower abdomen. And then I don't like to use the word chi because it doesn't have a medical connotation and it can actually turn off a doctor. So I would describe it as substantially increasing cellular energy production. And the reality is I have people who are in their mid 70s who are afraid to go up and down stairs. I work with them at their house for 2 hours, 4 days a week. And then at the end of a reasonable period of time, 6 months, a year, they were able to run up and down the stairs, no problem. So the knowledge base that I'm using comes from the basic training for internal martial arts, but without offensive and defensive movement. And so Parkinson's Resources of Oregon asked me the same thing, which is, well, what are your qualifications? And I gave them a list of all of the teachers that I studied with, and they were satisfied with that. And they sent some people to come to my classes, and I'm highly recommended here by everybody that I've worked with. And so I don't have any doubt at all that if you have somebody recovering from COVID who's feeling weak, who's feeling down, who has severe anxiety or depression, if they were to do these exercises on a regular basis and build up, ideally combined with the supplements, that there should be substantial improvement. And even 10 to 20% improvement should make a big, big difference in their overall well-being. And these methods work very, very well. And it goes way beyond straight Tai Chi or yoga, which is not usually tailored to the individual and which is often too athletic or too complex for many people to do. So what I've worked on in particular is to simplify everything so that everybody who practices consistently can get a major noticeable improvement in a relatively short period of time without becoming lost in Indian or Chinese medical terminology.
I think it's all really amazing stuff that you've done, and your experience is really unique.
I'm not a doctor, obviously, and someone should always check. I don't ever talk about something that I haven't taken on a regular basis or used successfully.
Yeah.
And then I went through this whole thing over the last year, and I trained before, during, and after having had COVID. And so I know the exact feelings that everybody is having. And then I know how to improve it by using the exercises. And then people should reduce sugar and alcohol definitely. Obviously, they shouldn't be
Right.
smoking, but
Healthy
those are,
habits. Right.
yeah, the way to approach this, in my opinion, is that you want to reduce any habits that are draining the body of energy and that are further inflaming the system. And then you want to increase all of the healthy habits, like healthy eating, right? So the person should be doing the 3-ounce servings of fruit a day, and then the 3 servings of whole vegetables, right? All of the standard health recommendations, they should be working on that at the same time so that the system is as free of toxicity as possible. But it's not that complicated. And so I agree that obviously we can't give any medical advice or there's a problem, but I think we can point people to articles and help them educate themselves. And breathing exercises, for the most part, I don't think anybody could have a problem with any form of respiratory therapy or exercise that improves lung function, which is the basis of how Tai Chi and Qigong and pranayama actually work. You're increasing the lung volume and then returning the breathing pattern to the way a child breathed before the age of 5. And in the last year, there's been 2 or 3 very successful books about, one's called Breath, and breath work has become more and more popular. But the reality is I have met so many people over the years who were Asian, who practiced for a period of time, and then their chronic problems resolved themselves. And it's sort of a standard anecdotal narrative that appears over and over that you don't hear about as a Western person unless you're interested in some form of holistic healing, and then it's still anecdotal. Whereas I have absolute certainty that if someone does this program, which primarily involves moving exercises, standing breathing exercises without movement, and then seated, but can also include lying down and walking, that there should be a substantial improvement in health and well-being that's noticeable in a relatively short period of time.
So one of the things that I talk about a lot, well, it's not one, it's 5, right? Self-care. So healthy living, you can't keep eating chemicals and expect your body to handle that. So I talk about clean diet, low histamine diet. I talk about stress management. I talk about healthy sleep patterns, because your body can't recover if it doesn't have time to sleep and repair itself. I talk about stretching, moving. My tag phrase is keep moving, keep breathing. And then let me see. So I do, and hydration. So healthy eating, hydration, stress management, sleep management, and movement, physical activity to keep your breathing, stemming to the breathing, moving. An example is I was talking to somebody who really had been sick about a year ago and battled depression post-COVID, and just recently started exercising again. And his comment was that even after 3 days of doing just some sit-ups and walking, which was within his tolerance level, that he was breathing much better and felt so much better. So there's definitely something in there. The only actual nutrition your cells or neurons need is oxygen. So if you're not taking in enough oxygen, and like you said, if you're in an environment that isn't providing you with quality oxygen, as you would be like if you were near a green area, your body is going to take longer to recover.
Yes.
Same thing with the way people overextend themselves, especially after long COVID, where they are sedentary and ill for quite some time, and then they feel good for one day and they go out and they try to do all the errands that they were supposed to do for the last 2-3 months, and then they end up back in bed the following day. So there's got to be balance to all of this, and stress isn't just emotional, it's physical and emotional. So, you can have an argument with somebody and that will trigger the same reaction as running without sleep, running without food, having an argument, having somebody pull a gun on you. They all release the adrenaline. They all create that fight or flight reaction. They all trigger the different nervous systems, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And that's why deep breathing is so important. When the adrenaline gets released into the body, it triggers a cascade that redirects the oxygen to your muscles away from your brain. So it's preparing the body to run. There is a book out there that said something about, I forget what the title of it was, but it's something about zebras. And basically what it says is that when your body is stressed, your body system can't recognize the difference between somebody who's just saying something cranky to you and somebody literally pulling a gun in your life, being threatened. So the bottom line is, when you're upset, there's an adrenaline surge, and the adrenaline surge is redirecting the oxygen away from your brain to your large muscles. It's starting that cascade of all those stress hormones, and that's irritating to the central nervous system when you live in a chronic stress situation. So when you've got people who've been dealing with COVID, either professionally, like nurses and healthcare workers, or people who are laying at home trying to recover or have been on a ventilator, afraid they're going to die, and now they have this mystery disease that makes them feel like they're having a heart attack, but they're not, makes them feel like they can't breathe, but there's nothing wrong with their lungs or their oxygen levels. It's all triggering the same cascade as if their life is being threatened. So it's really it's all integrated together. And this piece you're talking about, the deep breathing and the breath work, it naturally has to switch back into the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate slows down and those stress hormones stop being produced. When you are in fight or flight, you breathe faster, and that's to get more oxygen to your muscles for the running. So if you are intentionally breathing slow and stopping that, it switches back into the other system, which is your normal state, your calmer state that allows you to heal. I think there's a lot of congruencies between the science that is more accepted in the Western medicine and the Eastern theories that you're talking about.
Right. And I think that was a very, very clear explanation. And that what I've decided is that both Chinese and Indian medicine, which are the basis of yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, and meditation theory, are emphasizing to get the prana or the breath or the energy into what they call the central channel. And what I've decided is that the central channel is actually the vagus nerve, and that Western medicine says that the reason for the abundance of beneficial effects of Tai Chi and yoga and meditation is the stimulation of the vagus nerve. And so I would argue that doing these exercises, which are different than Western exercises because they avoid tension in the upper body, and then they coordinate the hands and the feet, the upper body and the lower body with the breathing. What that does is that it synchronizes the firing of the neurons in the brain, the heart, and the lower abdomen. And it's that synchronization that promotes the overall healing of the body and the brain. And I just read an article where they had taken a group of older adults who were sedentary, who were in their 60s, and they had them do 2 hours a week, 2 separate classes of an aerobic dance movement class. And they compared the 2 groups, one group that hadn't done anything, and then the other group that did the 2 classes a week. And there was a huge improvement in memory and brain function, and different parts of the brain were functioning cohesively and lighting up together because of the exercise. So when I see a study like that, I'm absolutely convinced, because that type of movement doesn't necessarily coordinate the upper body and the lower body dance. It's very good, but it's not like the Tai Chi or Qigong theory where the breathing, the hands, the feet, the alignment, and the balance is all synchronized. And so I'm convinced if those are the results with 2 hours of a gentle dancing a week, if someone was able to practice who had COVID for 30 minutes to an hour, 5 or 6 days a week, there would be major improvements in mood, memory, joie de vivre, and a reduction in the anxiety and depression, which is caused by the central nervous system inflammation and damage potentially.
So I want to just tie together what you just said with the Western medicine and with the biophysiological aspects of this. You're talking about the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body and literally touches every organ and body part.
Yes.
It runs down the center part of your body.
Yes.
So it controls your heart, it controls your pancreas, it controls your gut, everything. So
Lungs.
That's a really important nerve. Yep, everything from head to toe. So when you're talking about the exercises and the movements, whether it's aerobics or Qigong or Tai Chi, synchronizing the neurons, basically what's happening is with those activities, you are releasing endorphins. And endorphins are another kind of happy hormone. That's my little phrase, happy hormones. I like the happy hormones. They make people happy.
Right.
So the endorphins also kill pain. So there's a few components of these movement activities. One is actually chemical as far as releasing those endorphins from the physical activity, which are going to counter any stress hormones. When you're releasing endorphins, that's going to go along the lines of the serotonin cycles. And the serotonin is the daytime hormone, and that's why when you're awake, serotonin is produced, especially when you have access to sunlight. That's why in the winter and in places like Alaska where it's dark most of the day, seasonal affective disorder and depression are more common. So endorphins do the similar thing, and they rebalance all of those neurochemicals to make sure that the brain is operating properly. So there's another point to this, which it's hard to discredit. And it might be a little difficult for people to grasp, but the distraction factors. So when you are doing something like aerobics or playing a game or dancing or working on your breathing, and you're consciously thinking about that activity, you can't possibly also be thinking about how miserable, difficult, and hard everything is. And those are the two pieces between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, where you want to be in that harmonious state, because it actually changes the hormones that are coursing through your body, which affect the brain, which affect the nerves. Because again, the stress hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is adrenaline and noradrenaline, they create stimulation. They are harsh chemicals. They are made to be used temporarily. We should never be running on adrenaline for long periods of time. And not only these restorative movements that we're talking about and the breathing that we're talking about to regulate that, but again, running on adrenaline ties back into getting enough sleep, eating foods that are healthy, avoiding any chemicals, avoiding foods that, trigger allergic reactions, which is different for every person, and staying hydrated. All of these things are so essential. And what I'm seeing in the group members with long COVID is, first of all, they're fatigued, and in their body, they don't understand necessarily that their body has been through a major assault. This virus is no small matter. And, I think people have a very difficult time understanding how their body has been injured by this. But if they were to break their leg and you were to put a cast on their leg, they would know, they would have a physical reminder of the pain, but also a visual reminder. I mean, it's so evident when your leg is broken that you have to give your body time to recover. You can't walk on it, and it's a good 12 weeks, and then it hurts you for another 1 to 2 years. And arthritis can develop as well. You can tell when the weather's changing. It just takes a long time to recover from injuries. And what people need to understand is that this virus and any illness that you get is an assault on your body that causes injury. Even though it's not a traumatic injury, it is not your normal state.
That makes sense. And what I would add as well is that there's a differentiation between hard or what's called external exercise, which would be running and lifting weights or heavy weights.
Yep.
That would be external. That is not the immediate approach to take when you're recovering. And most Westerners don't know that there's another way of exercising where you don't tighten the muscles in the body. You train the tendons and the ligaments and the fascia. And the fascia are considered to be where the acupuncture meridians are. And that's why Western medicine has not successfully identified them, because they dissect corpses and they've dried up because they're fluid networks along the bones. And so the idea of soft exercise, and Tai Chi is the most famous example, but Qigong is actually used even more effectively or in conjunction with Tai Chi for recovery. What happens then is that every time you practice, there's the stimulation of the vagus nerve and then a much greater flow of oxygen to all of the tissues. And so what I would argue is that the Qigong type soft breathing exercise, which can include aerobic and anaerobic versions, is the only system that actually can improve organ function by synchronizing everything and then improving that message from the brainstem through the vagus nerve to all of the organ systems. And that idea is not well known in terms of Western medicine, but my assumption is that there would be greatly improved and lowering of inflammatory levels throughout the body relatively quickly with people who might never get this type of approach in a simple, easy, natural, functional way for self-care and self-healing. Because really what you want to do is following all of those suggestions that you made earlier about clean eating, healthy sleeping, healthy aerobic exercise, and air, right? High quality, as you said, clean oxygen from a natural source. Mm-hmm. If you start adding in and layering all of these methods, I think the body can recover at 2 to 3 times the normal rate, and that the average person never really, they'll go take a yoga class or they'll take a Tai Chi class. Those require generally a relatively high level of fitness, and they're way too complicated. So our goal is to make this form of self-healing available to everybody at all ages and at all levels of physical conditioning. So it's not just for athletes, which unfortunately is the way a lot of gyms are working, and then the way a lot of stuff for younger people is working. And, I am used to again, it's anecdotal, I recognize that, but once you get to know somebody over a period of years, and then you hear these accounts over and over, I'm used to stories where the old Tai Chi master can outwalk all of the young people because the way he's breathing is much more efficient. He uses energy and generates energy much more efficiently. So the young guys that are straining and that may be overly muscular or too tight, they get worn out, and the old guy can keep on going. And I've had teachers who were in their mid-80s who were able to exercise 2 hours a day and were strong and were muscular. And that's a relatively common old Kung Fu master or old Tai Chi master scenario that's very well known. We don't really have an equivalent, maybe Jack LaLanne to some degree, but at the same time, I would argue that everybody can improve 10 to 40% with relatively little time and effort if they stick with the practice consistently and then add in those other parts, which is to remove toxic or processed foods and start doing the clean eating and to really upgrade every aspect of mind, body, well-being in the process.
Yeah, and I think to add to your points, I think that first of all, when you get into hard exercise, if you have not worked gradually up to that level, or if it's not your natural state, one of my sons is super muscular and everything is really easy for him. But, you know, if we were to go head to head in a workout and I were to try to lift the same weight he was lifting, that would be a stressful situation. So that would be a situation that requires the adrenaline and all of those other cortisol and the corticosteroids that trigger the fight or flight reaction, whether or not exercise is healthy for me, because exercising beyond my capabilities is not healthy for me. And I'm not talking just about me, I'm talking it's just not healthy for anyone to exercise beyond their capabilities. That is one piece too that I think people with long COVID have to understand, is that when they've been sick for a while, their capabilities are going to be dramatically decreased. And it's probably temporary for most of them, but it's one of those things where people are celebrating the day they're able to get up out of bed and walk to the kitchen. Some people are unable to stand up long enough to brush their teeth after they're sick. And for them to expect themselves to be able to go back to work full time or to go grocery shopping or even make a meal, that's an unrealistic expectation. That also plays into a part with nutrition, because then that's when you're more likely to do something like turn to a donut or a piece of cake or a cookie for a quick energy pickup, or order food out from, or get, you know, like Chick-fil-A or buy a packaged meal at the store because it's easier and you don't have the energy. But in the long run, that's just going to sap your energy longer. So what I was getting at was when you are pushing yourself beyond your exercise tolerance, whether you're in your healthy state or recovery state, that's going to be a stressor on your body, causing those stress hormones to trigger, irritating your nervous system again. Going to your point of Qigong and how the Tai Chi and the Qigong activate the vagus nerve and create health and wellness for the cells, I just want to get into a little bit of deeper explanation on how the Qigong can affect that vagus nerve. And that is that when you are sitting all the time and you are cramped up, not moving for hours at a time, it impairs your blood flow, which impairs your oxygen supply to all of your cells. And you are absolutely right that when you are able to activate the vagus nerve with non-stress hormones, so with the endorphins, that's going to be more nutritive to the cells that need the oxygen, and that's the only energy they need to function properly, the neurons in your body. So then I also wanted to say, you talked about something being pretty complicated like yoga and those other pieces. And that's another life skill that people need to adapt, whether they're changing their diet, whether they're changing the way a relationship goes with how much they're arguing with somebody, whether they're trying to adapt a new exercise plan. Change is always difficult. And if you try to, if you pick a complicated goal and you are narrowly focused on achieving that goal 100% of the time, then you are going to have a very difficult time achieving that goal at all, and you are setting yourself up for failure. So smoking is a really good example of this. In my opinion, smoking is not healthy for you. I think that's pretty much proven across, all medical contexts. But if you have been smoking a pack a day or 2 packs a day for 20 years and now you've decided to quit, that can be really hard. It can also be traumatic to your body and trigger those stress hormones again. So my opinion is, if you pick up a cigarette and you take a puff on it and you put it down when it's only half smoke, well, look at you. You made it half, you improved yourself half a cigarette today. So if you're going to set a goal to heal yourself, make sure that you're giving yourself enough leeway. For instance, if you had a kid, or, for a healthcare worker, if you had a patient and they were stressing themselves out because they didn't exercise 7 days in a row, you would tell them, you would counsel somebody else, it's okay. It's okay if you miss a day. You need to treat yourself the way you treat others. And you need not to be so hard on yourself when you are setting these new routines and these new habits.
That's very true. And that's why I think, particularly with something that involves this meditation aspect, where you can practice with your eyes closed, and the more relaxed you can become, the better the circulation is and the better the stimulation of the vagus nerve is. So what you really want, since there's 6 major brainwave states, and there's some variations depending on how they're categorized, but there's beta, high beta, and gamma. Those are all fast brainwave states, and they're associated with stress. Whereas the slow brainwave states, alpha, which is sometimes compared to meditation, theta, which dreaming and REM states fall into, and then delta, which is deep dreamless sleep. Those are the brainwave states which balance and heal and rejuvenate the body. And then the stem cells are produced in the bone marrow during delta brainwave states. And so what you're really trying to do when you get to the intermediate or the advanced levels, and it's comfortable, it's easy, it's timeless, it's blissful, is to have your body regenerating at a cellular level the way you do when you go through the full healthy sleep cycle each time you practice. And that's where the rejuvenation and the major healing potential actually lies. And so there's a whole theory in Chinese medicine where what you're trying to do is to get the qi into the bone marrow, which then will produce more and healthier stem cells, and then everything rejuvenates. I don't know if I would say that to a doctor, but the reality is your whole system, including your skeleton, changes as you gain the ability to synchronize the breathing with the slow brainwave states, and then circulation is increased, and then you also experience more and more feelings of well-being, which is the counter to the stress and the anxiety. And that's another well-known anecdotal result, where each time the person practices, they notice that they feel sensations of well-being for longer and longer periods of time after they practice. And it's substantially different than the runner's high, which is the normal endorphin release that athletes experience, which is why they enjoy aerobic exercise so much. But neurologists at this point are saying that the 3 best things that you can do for your brain are meditation, exercise, and then learning something new every day. And so all of this is consistent with this healthy lifestyle, and then gradually reducing the bad habits and improving the good habits, as you said before.
So to kind of paraphrase what you're saying and kind of reposition it, you mentioned a phrase that is definitely going to cause skepticism in Western medicine about getting the qi into the bone marrow. And as you described it, that learning this deep meditative state, it mimics the same state you have when you get into the proper restorative sleep levels of the delta brain waves. So when you are doing that deep meditative state, you are slowing your brain waves, you are breathing deeper, you are taking in more oxygen. So maybe another way to also put that is more palatable in the United States and Western medicine is that the oxygen is then getting down into the body to the depths of the cells that are needing to recover. And by setting some time aside to practice this meditation, which seems kind of elusive to some people, but it's basically a deep relaxation, if I'm understanding this correctly and putting it out there right, that getting into a deep relaxation state can give you the same health benefits as a deep sleep for a good night's sleep, which is generally recommended 6 to 8 hours. And I think that's a problem with COVID, is that, or the long COVID, is that people are complaining of insomnia and not being able to sleep and rest. And that is, again, causing those adrenaline releases. And they're going into a chronic state of stress because your body every single day has to get into deep sleep so that the cells that you used and damaged and tore up basically with your daily activities, whether you were exercising or not, they need to restore and recover or be replaced overnight when you're sleeping. So if you are having trouble sleeping at night, if you can practice this meditative state with the deep, slow breathing and slowing your brain waves down, which is a conscious effort not to think about stressful things. That's why they talk about guided guided medication. That's why they talk about guided meditation. Even when I used to teach childbirth, we would teach the mother to focus in the room on a spot and focus only on that spot and keep all of their mind on that to get through a contraction. So same theory applies here. When you are going into this meditative state, you necessarily have to stop thinking about those stressful things. You have to replace that with a vision or a positive thought or a chant, a phrase you say over and over again that's phrased in a positive manner that's going to make you feel better about something. You don't want to say, I don't have money, I don't have money, I don't have money all over. You want to say, I'm getting healthier and stronger every day. And replacing those negative thoughts while you're relaxing your brain and doing your deep breathing is going to restore those cells that were damaged either by the virus or by lack of sleep or by your daily activity, if that makes any sense.
That's exactly right. And another part of what we would hope to recommend would be, as the person is falling asleep, and this comes from a French doctor named Emile Coué, which is very similar to the suggestions that you mentioned, where the idea is that if you can give yourself one simple suggestion that you repeat over and over as you fall asleep or before a nap, something like, my mind and body is happy and healthy. And you say it in the present, and then it's repeated over and over and over. That will trigger the healing or placebo effect within the body and is programming your unconscious so that your body repairs itself effectively. And in the 20s, when Emile Coué came up with this method, he had tremendous rates of success with incurable illnesses like tuberculosis. And then when he came to this country, the press ridiculed him because it sounded too childish or too simple. But actually, replacing a negative dialogue or a negative self-suggestion with positive suggestions will do exactly what you were talking about earlier, which is to switch you from the stress mode to the well-being mode, which is the natural mode, because you need that to thrive and to be creative and to feel good. The other thing that I would say is that the body rejuvenates itself, according to Western medicine, by food and sleep. And what isn't understood is that it's possible to do that using breathing and slow brainwave states and slow movement to synchronize everything. You could define chi as oxygen also. That would be a relatively accurate translation. Then you're saturating the cells with high quality oxygen, and that is promoting a better ATP production and then overall well-being. And lowering the inflammatory levels throughout the body is a big key to getting the self-repair and the self-healing process accelerated or increased in a slow, consistent, regular way where the person regains their strength. And one of the problems with normal anaerobics strength training is that the people may be taught incorrectly to hold their breath. And so it often has very bad effects on the blood pressure. And if they were breathing correctly, it would be fine. But there are now estimates that 80 to 90% of people are breathing in a very shallow way from the upper lungs. And so what we're trying to do is retrain the body to breathe naturally from the lower abdomen using the diaphragm, which is how you breathed before you were age 5, and which most adults lose unless they have done special training. And so the whole combination is what makes this approach so effective in terms of teaching the people how to take care of themselves and then to generate the self-healing potential of the body and the mind.
I think you hit on a lot of good points there. I want to go back to what you were saying about Emile Coué. Did I say that correctly?
Coué, yeah, C-O-U-E with an accent, egu.
Okay, so Emile Coué and the concept about one simple suggestion. I personally have experienced this where I hate getting up in the morning, and I would, when I worked at the hospital, my shift started at 7 a.m. So it meant I was out the door, rain or snow, by 6 a.m., which meant I was up at 5 a.m. to get ready for work. And that's not my thing. I don't tend to go to bed early, so getting up early was terrible for me. And I noticed that I was going to bed dreading getting up in the morning. And I just did this silly little exercise where I started telling myself that I was going to feel bright and fresh in the morning. And it was so interesting because the next morning I would wake up happy and cheery and feeling rested. And the nights I went to bed feeling very nervous about getting up early or cranky about it, they were not great days. Not at all.
What you're describing is the effects of successful self-suggestion. Mm-hmm. And the whole healing mechanism of the body can be stimulated that way. And it's actually the basis of medical hypnosis as well, which some people are not familiar with, but which before there were all of the psychiatric medications, there were many successful uses of self-hypnosis in particular, very effective for learning information. And then the reality is that the suggestion that you give yourself before you fall asleep can totally alter the way your body is creating energy or healing during the sleep cycle.
Absolutely. We talk about hypnosis, we talk about meditation, but basically they're both the same thing when you're talking about deep relaxation. And the effects deep relaxation has on your body is to slow down those brain waves and to allow you to breathe in deeper and slower breaths, allowing your body to remain healthier and giving it the opportunity to heal itself when you've had any sort of stressor, whether it's physical, mental, medical, sleep deprivation, dehydration, nutrition, any of those.
That's absolutely true. And really all you have to do is breathing through the nose, inhale for a count of 5 or 6, exhale for a count of 5 or 6 evenly, and do that about 100 times, and anyone should feel much better. But then you can add all of these other methods as well. But basically, learning to breathe so that you can regulate the nervous system and switch from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system whenever you practice should bring the body and the mind back into balance relatively smoothly over a period of consistent practice as you build up gradually.
Yep. It's clear that, especially through long COVID, that Western medicine doesn't have the answer to everything.
Yes.
And so what I call on people experiencing long COVID symptoms is to open your mind to alternatives that can be complementary, like acupuncture, like qigong, like meditation, and even doesn't even have to be Eastern medicine.
Right.
Massage, chiropractic,
Right.
nutrition, all of these things play essential roles. And the only way we're going to find answers here today is by using all of the resources we have.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. Well, I think we've had an excellent conversation, and I'm hoping that we can have many more. And it would be very interesting to get it to long haul COVID patients and note the results. And I know it'll be anecdotal, at least in the beginning, but that's where all science starts, and that it's a great place to start. And I would hope to do that in conjunction with your organization if you feel comfortable with it.
So I just want to point out something, that I might have a tool that we can use to measure functional activity.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be the same screening tool used periodically, right? So use it prior to engaging in any of these things.
Right.
And then, doing it for whatever period of time, whether it's a week or a month, however we figure it out, or however maybe the user wants to figure it out and see if they're progressing. But if they can take this functional evaluation and do it periodically at the same time they're doing these exercises, or even if they're skipping the exercises, then that would show backwards of progress. So I need some time to get that piece together. I've just really learned about some of it today. So really in the very early exploratory stages of that, but it's a standardized test that's being used in Western medicine. So I think that we might be able to capture that, and then people can do their own self-evaluation. And then when they're doing these exercises and taking these suggestions, they can actually gauge their own improvement.
Excellent, excellent. But it's very important that the person logs and tracks their improvement and expects their improvement, because as we've been discussing, it's the overall motivation, mental state, and belief system that plays a major, major role in terms of self-healing and improvement and creative development.
You're absolutely right. When I've got people who are saying their day was so awful and they just say they can't go on, one of the things I say to them is, did you wake up today? There are people who didn't, and you woke up today, so celebrate that. Or this one woman who she brushed her teeth today. Let's celebrate that. Or walked around the block. That's it might not be where you were, but it's better than you were yesterday. So enjoy that, celebrate that, and pay attention.
Right. right? Gratitude is extremely important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Extremely important. This has been very enjoyable. I'm so happy I got to speak to you. And
Me
onward
too.
and upward.
We'll see what I can get together for that functional assessment, okay?
Beautiful. Beautiful.
All righty.